For 32 years, I measured my world through structural precision, clean lines, and absolute integrity. As an architectural draftsman, my entire career was built on the belief that if a foundation isn't honest, the whole structure will eventually collapse. I applied that exact same logic to my personal life, especially when it came to my family. My father, Arthur Vance, was a retired civil engineer. He was a quiet, disciplined man of routine and immense dignity who raised me single-handedly in our modest suburban home just outside of Richmond, Virginia. My biological mother passed away from a sudden aneurysm when I was only 7 years old. From that moment on, it was always just Dad and me against the world. He was the kind of man who woke up at 5:30 a.m. every single morning, polished his work boots, and sat at the kitchen table reading blueprints with a steaming mug of black coffee. He taught me how to read scales, how to level a beam, and most importantly, how to stand firm in who I was. He taught me that family wasn't just a word, it was an unyielding promise to protect the people you love, no matter the personal cost. So 6 years ago, when Dad introduced us to Brenda Carver, I desperately wanted to believe she was the blessing he deserved in his golden years. Brenda was charming, softly spoken, and possessed a warm, maternal demeanor that felt like a breath of fresh air in our quiet house. Dad was 62 at the time, retired, and lonely. When he looked at Brenda, his eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen since my mother died. Because I loved my father more than anything in this world, I opened my heart to her completely. I welcomed her into our home, celebrated their quiet courthouse wedding, and genuinely believed that our small family had finally found its missing piece. I trusted her implicitly. I believed her smiles were real, her affection was genuine, and her presence in my father's life was a gift. I had no idea I had just invited a predator through the front door. The illusion of a happy family began to fracture 3 years ago when Dad was diagnosed with vascular dementia and advanced heart disease. The man who could calculate structural load-bearing capacity in his head suddenly couldn't remember where he left his glasses or what year it was. It broke my heart into a million pieces, but I didn't hesitate for a single second. I did what any loving daughter would do. I reorganized my entire life around his care. I moved out of my spacious downtown apartment and rented a cramped, overpriced studio closer to his house. I passed up 2 major promotions at my architecture firm, promotions that would have added at least $40,000 to my annual salary, because I knew the extra travel requirements would mean leaving Dad alone. My workdays became an exhausting marathon. I would wake up at dawn, head to the office, work a full shift, and then drive straight to Dad's house to spend the evening managing his physical therapy, cooking his renal-safe meals, and sitting by his bedside. 4 nights a week, I slept on a squeaky fold-out cot in his hallway, just so I could be there when he woke up disoriented in the middle of the night. Over those 3 brutal years, I drained over $18,000 of my personal savings. I spent it on customized mobility ramps, specialized home nursing visits, medical co-pays, and oxygen supplies that weren't fully covered by his insurance. I did it all without a single complaint because I loved my father. Brenda, on the other hand, played a completely different game. Whenever the doctors visited or neighbors dropped by with casseroles, Brenda put on an Oscar-worthy performance. She would pat Dad's hand, wipe his forehead with a tissue, and sigh about how hard it was being a devoted caregiver. But the moment the audience disappeared, so did Brenda. She constantly claimed she was burnt out and needed restful retreats to manage her stress. At least twice a month, she would pack a high-end leather suitcase and disappear for long weekends, claiming she was going down to Savannah, Georgia, to care for an ailing, elderly cousin named Clara. That left me to handle every single aspect of Dad's grueling care alone. Yet, despite her constant absences, Brenda made sure to maintain absolute, iron-fisted control over Dad's finances. She insisted on managing his primary checking account, his civil service pension checks, and his private investment portfolio. Whenever I gently brought up the idea of hiring a professional financial planner to streamline his medical bills, Brenda would snap at me, claiming I was insulting her capability as his wife. I was so consumed by exhaustion, grief, and the daily struggle to keep my father comfortable that I brushed off my growing suspicions. I told myself she was just stressed. I gave her the benefit of the doubt again and again. I sacrificed my youth, my career, and my financial stability out of pure love for my father, completely blind to the fact that while I was tending to his dying body, Brenda was quietly preparing to steal his life's work. My father passed away on a Tuesday night at 11:42 p.m. His breathing simply slowed, his pulse fluttered, and then he was gone. I sat by his bed, holding his calloused hand, weeping quietly into the blankets as the hospice nurse pronounced his time of death. Brenda stood near the bedroom doorway, wiping her eyes with a lace handkerchief, a performance so shallow it sent a chill down my spine. Less than 12 hours later, before my father's body was even transported to the funeral home, Brenda's grief vanished into thin air. I drove back to the house at 8 a.m. the next morning, carrying a tray of coffee and a folder containing Dad's pre-planned funeral arrangements. When I tried my key in the front door, it didn't turn. The lock had been replaced. I knocked, thinking it was a mistake, and after a long minute, Brenda opened the door just a few inches. She wasn't wearing black. She was wearing a silk robe, holds a mug of fresh coffee, and looking at me with a cold, triumphant glare I had never seen before. "What's going on, Brenda?" I asked, my voice trembling from exhaustion and grief. "My key doesn't work." "I had the locks changed at first light, Kendra," she said, her voice completely flat, devoid of a single drop of warmth. "This is a private estate now." Before I could even process her words, she stepped out onto the porch, carrying a heavy, black plastic trash bag. She dropped it unceremoniously at my feet with a loud thud. "What is this?" I whispered. "That's your childhood junk," she replied, leaning against the doorframe. "Your photo albums, your high school diplomas, and those useless drawings your dad kept in his desk. Take it and go." "Brenda, my dad died yesterday," I shouted, tears stinging my eyes. "We need to go over his will, his pension paperwork, and his burial preferences. I need to get into his study." Brenda let out a short, cruel laugh that made my blood run cold. "There is nothing to go over, Kendra. Your father signed a revised survivorship deed and spousal pension transfer 6 months ago. Everything. This $750,000 house, his $6,000 monthly civil service pension, his savings accounts, and every piece of furniture in this structure belongs exclusively to me. I typed a new master code into his office safe 2 hours ago. You are not on his accounts, you are not in his will, and you aren't entitled to a single red cent." I stood there, frozen on the porch, staring at the woman my father had loved, realizing that every single year of my sacrifice had been swept away in a calculated act of pure evil. I walked down the porch steps with that black trash bag heavy in my hand. My knees were shaking, and my chest felt like it was being crushed under a block of lead. I threw the bag into my passenger seat, got into the car, and closed the door. The silence inside my sedan was deafening. For 10 minutes, I just sat there staring at the front door of my childhood home. I watched Brenda through the living room window. She was casually walking around with a clipboard, taking notes on the furniture, already cataloging what she was going to keep or sell. No tears, no mourning, just cold, predatory inventory. That was the exact second something snapped inside me. The heavy, suffocating grief that had been crushing my chest didn't disappear. It transformed. It hardened into a freezing, razor-sharp clarity. I wiped the tears off my cheeks with the back of my hand and looked at my face in the rearview mirror. The soft, accommodating daughter who spent 3 years burning out her youth to please everyone was gone. "You think you won, Brenda," I whispered to the empty car. "You think you played me." My father was a structural engineer. He spent 40 years calculating stress points, load factors, and hidden structural weaknesses. He used to tell me, "Kendra, every bad structure looks solid until you find the one hairline crack holding the whole lie together. Once you find that crack, all you have to do is apply pressure. Brenda thought she had locked every door and changed every code, but in her arrogant rush to kick me out on the street, she made a fatal mistake. She forgot that I knew her routine better than anyone. I knew about her sudden trips, her locked cabinet in the secondary garage, and the suspicious financial transfers she always tried to hide. I started the engine, put the car in drive, and pulled away from the curb. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to find that crack, and I was going to tear Brenda's entire world down to the foundation. My first call wasn't to a family member or a friend. It was to Detective Carl Hayes, a licensed private investigator specializing in forensic accounting and asset recovery. I spent $3,500, literally the very last of my emergency liquid savings, to hire him. My instructions were simple and precise. Look into Brenda Carver, focus on Savannah, Georgia, and find out who Cousin Clara really is. 4 days later, Hayes called me into his downtown office. He slid a thick, yellow manila folder across his wooden desk with a look of disbelief on his face. "Kendra," Hayes said, leaning back in his leather chair, "your stepmother isn't just a fraud. She's a professional bigamist." My mouth went completely dry. "What do you mean?" Hayes opened the folder, revealing high-resolution surveillance photos, official state certificates, and property deeds. "There is no Cousin Clara. Brenda's maiden name is Brenda Miller. In October 1998, she married a man named Waylon Miller in Chatham County, Georgia. They bought a house together, had 2 kids, and ran an auto repair shop. Here's the kicker: I checked every single municipal court database across Georgia and Virginia. Brenda never divorced Waylon Miller. There is no divorce decree, no annulment, and no death certificate. Waylon is very much alive." I stared at the photos. There was Brenda, standing in the driveway of a suburban Georgia home, laughing with a burly man in grease-stained overalls. Waylon, and 2 young adults. "She's been living a double life," Hayes explained. "She married your father 6 years ago while still legally married to Waylon. She spent the last 3 years funneling your dad's cash and pension advances directly into Waylon's struggling auto shop to keep his business afloat." A cold, calculated smile spread across my face. Under Virginia state law, bigamy isn't just a crime. It completely voids a marriage from its inception. A bigamous marriage is void ab initio. It legally never existed. Instead of storming over to the house and making a scene, I played the long game. I took Hayes's evidence packet straight to a top-tier probate attorney, Marcus Vance. Together, we quietly drafted an emergency petition for decree of nullity, backed by certified court records from Georgia. Simultaneously, Marcus filed an ex-parte emergency injunction freezing every single bank account, pension transfer, and property deed associated with Arthur Vance's estate under active financial fraud statutes. We didn't notify Brenda. We didn't leave a paper trail. We let her believe she had won, watching silently as she scheduled a massive open house party at my father's property for the following Sunday to show off her newly inherited estate to Waylon, her adult children, and her friends. I waited for that exact Sunday afternoon to spring the trap. At 2 p.m. on Sunday, 2 moving vans and 3 luxury cars were parked outside my father's house. Brenda was standing on the front lawn with Waylon, her 2 adult children, and a local real estate agent, clinking champagne glasses to celebrate selling her house. I pulled up to the driveway, followed directly by 2 marked sheriff deputies and my attorney, Marcus. Brenda's smile instantly withered as I stepped out of my car. "Kendra, I told you to stay off my property, or I'll have you arrested for trespassing," she hissed, trying to push me back toward the street. Marcus stepped in front of her, pulling a sealed court packet from his briefcase. "Actually, Mrs. Miller, you're the one trespassing," he said, his voice echoing across the lawn for all her guests to hear. "What are you talking about?" "I'm his widow," she shrieked. "You aren't a widow. You're a bigamist," Marcus replied calmly, handing her the formal court order. This is an emergency decree of nullity from the circuit court, because you were legally married to Waylon Miller when you signed your marriage certificate with Arthur Vance. Your marriage to Mr. Vance was completely void from day one. Waylon froze, looking between Brenda and the deputies in absolute shock. Brenda, what the hell is this? He demanded. The lead deputy stepped forward. Brenda Miller, because your marriage is null and void, you have zero legal right to this estate, his pension, or any assets. Furthermore, state prosecutors have issued a formal warrant for bigamy, grand theft, and pension fraud. You have 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings from the porch and clear off the premises. I watched in pure, uninterrupted silence as Brenda's face turned gray. The house, the $6,000 monthly pension, the $750,000 equity. Every single penny she had spent 6 years calculating and manipulating to steal collapsed like a house of cards. The state attorney's office seized her accounts, placing a massive restitution lien on Waylon's repair shop to recover every dollar she had embezzled from my dad. As the legal sole heir, 100% of my father's estate, house, and investments reverted directly to me. 10 minutes later, as Brenda sobbed in the back of a police cruiser, I walked through the front door of my childhood home. I sat down in my father's study, unlocked his safe using his real birth year, and carefully placed my childhood scrapbooks back on his desk where they belonged. I was finally home,